Welcome to episode 3 of Hacktics and Telemetry, a Rapid7 produced podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Douglas McKee, or at Full Metal Packets, and I'm joined by the one and only Crypto Cat. If you have not gotten a chance to check out our previous episodes, you should go to the Rapid7 YouTube channel and check them out. We talk about all kinds of things, sometimes related to AI and sometimes not related to AI. We like to talk about things in cybersecurity such as zero-day, bug bounty research, and new research that is emerging. And we do this in 3 distinct segments. We do this in what's called the Situation Room, where we have a treat for you in this episode where we actually have a special guest joining us to go through some of the articles in the Situation Room with us. And
before we go into the Situation Room, Doug, I've actually got a quick piece of news here, which is of interest if you're into security. And that's
I can't wait for the Situation Room
7.0 is releasing a new physical dongle that you need for all installations. This is a new way to keep your WordPress installations secure.
Well, this is a big deal, right? Because don't we constantly see, I know at least on the Rapid7, we see WordPress after WordPress after WordPress vulnerability. So what's this dongle going to do for us?
Well, I think you can spend either £30 or up to £2,000 to get yourself 50 dongles on a keychain. And yeah, plug it in. If you plug it in, your WordPress is secure. If you take it out, everything is Comic Sans.
That sounds super easy. Just spend a little bit of money and bam, all your WordPress problems go away. Of course, I have a sneaky suspicion that you are doing this to me around April 1st, isn't it? So there we go. There it is. That's just an April Fool's joke. But hey, it would be nice if instead of an April Fool's joke, we could just get more security around WordPress plugins. But there it is. But thank you for that very useful interruption, Jonah. Now we are going to, I was explaining to our viewers, we have 2 other segments. We have the War Room, which is usually our guest segment. And we've got a special guest today talking to us about recent research done with cellular technology. So stay tuned for that. And of course, then we've got the Mitigation Minute, where we want to leave you with solutions, not problems. So we will talk about all the different things at a very quick high level of what we heard throughout the episode and what our recommendations are to help you prepare to be a more defensible organization. We would greatly appreciate it if you like the content you hear on this podcast to like, subscribe, and share the best you can. It helps us get the word out about the research that's going on around the industry, and that would be really awesome if you could do that. Okay, Jonah, we've got a lot to cover today, so we should get into it. Are you ready to bring us to the Situation Room?
Yeah, let's go. All right, we're on the episode 3 Situation Room. I'm joined by Doug and a special guest this week. It is Harrison, also known as Arson. And we're going to cover some of the recent news, some of the cool research as usual. I think one of the big things that happened over the past couple of weeks is the supply chain attacks. We had LightLLM that was hacked, and that was actually a supply chain attack on a supply chain attack because they initially...
I disagree, Jonah. I think the biggest thing that happened over the last week is that we got Harrison to join our podcast for the Situation Room. That's the biggest thing that's happened over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, for us, that's definitely the biggest thing.
Tell me what you want us to know about LightLLM.
It was compromised by Team PCP, who've been involved with quite a lot of these supply chain attacks. Actually, there's quite a bit of drama with them on Twitter as well. It's a bit weird that most of their main hackers have Twitter accounts and they're on arguing with people and companies constantly, but save their Twitter drama for there, I guess. So yeah, a supply chain attack. In this case, they were siphoning a lot of, if you were doing anything, well, it's an LLM, so if you're doing any AI-related stuff, then they'd be taking your keys. They could also, grab your SSH keys from your system. And it wasn't the only supply chain attack either. We also had the Axios attack, which happened a few days later, or a week later. That wasn't Team PCP this time. That was supposedly, or it was attributed to North Korean hackers, so a crypto-related thing, as they like to do. So yeah, that's supply chain attacks keep happening. I think that's going to be a trend we're just going to keep seeing more and more of, because it's obviously a super valuable target to get into. Why do you think
that? Why do you think we're going to see more and more supply chain attacks?
I mean, I've spent a lot of years working on the defensive side as well. And I can tell you just from personal experience that, especially when you're looking at NPM packages, which I know was what happened with the Axios, obviously, you have dependencies and dependencies of dependencies and everything. You have these nested dependencies that are in there. And anybody who's ever had to, work in a shop like that where you have to generate an SBOM with all the different NPM packages and try to sort through it and try to address the finding. I mean, it's just very, very difficult. The amount of complexity, the amount of work and everything that has to go in to sort all that out, make sure everything stays updated. And then even in the Axios case, right, if you keep everything updated, well, now you're in trouble. Now you're getting the opposite side of that, where you've updated and that has caused an issue, so it's the amount of complexity that goes in makes it a very easy target. And I think you would combine that with the fact that you can use social engineering to
Well,
be
hold
able
on. I'll interrupt you just for a second because I think that's a really understated point, right? Especially in the industry, we talk all the time about there's these simple solutions, right? Why can't you just like detect the supply chain attacker? Why can't you just track all your NPM packages, right? And I think you're pointing on a very important complexity, which is, this one of the things that makes this so valuable to attackers is that we know it's very difficult for you to defend against, right? I think that's a really awesome point that you're pointing out there, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. 100%. And it's the attackers, they want to target, absolutely. They know this. And it's easy. Like you said, from the outside, it's like adding a cookie flag. One of the most difficult vulnerabilities I ever had to remediate was adding an HTTP only flag to one of our JSON web tokens, just because the way the application works, So yeah, it's kind of the same thing. Like, from the attacker's perspective, when you're looking at it and you can just get this malicious package into it, it's easy to think, well, why didn't you just update it to the next patch or everything? But there's so many downstream consequences. There's so many different dependencies. There's so many NPM packages that include other NPM packages as part of it that you've got to audit. The amount of complexity just makes it incredibly difficult for an application security team to deal with that.
And one of the things that you're alluding to there, and so when I teach product security testing for SANS, one of the things that we point out is that you can't defend against things that you don't know about. And sometimes the simple fact of knowing what packages you have in your supply chain is the hardest thing to defend against these supply chain attacks, right?
Absolutely.
Do you know that you're using this NPM package?
Yep. And look at what they did. This is what good attackers do as well, is they attack the psychology behind it. You notice they didn't try to put a package in there to where you had to pull it off in a specific way or anything. They already know that the majority of what you're doing to make it easier to keep these packages updated is you're going to put that little caret or what code in your package.json to where it's going to pull the latest version. You're not hard coding a lot of your versions because it's a lot more difficult to maintain. So they're attacking that part of it. You've got this small amount of convenience for the developers and the security team. That's what they're really targeting. And then you combine that with the fact that when you look at how they're actually executing the attack, it's a social engineering when it comes to they're finding a way to get access to accounts that, get access to a password or somebody else's account that has the ability to upload that. So you have these two, you have a high amount of complexity. You have these two attack vectors that are very difficult to deal with. You have the person and then the complexity of the supply chain. That all comes together. It makes it a really great target for attackers.
And then that's 100%. I agree with that 100%. And then I think one of the things to add on top of that is when you're talking about ROI, which is effectively what you're saying, right? Return on investment for attackers. Not only do you have that complexity for defenders, but you have what is the value to an attacker if they can attack a package that is used across hundreds of thousands of organizations versus going after a specific organization or a product that's used in a limited organization. They're clearly going to get a better chance of effectively getting that payday that they're looking for, right? Because all attackers come down to two things being motivated, right? We come down to either financial motivation or destruction. And it doesn't really matter which one you're going after. You want to hit a wide range of targets to increase that value. So I think that combined with the difficulty and the complexity, we are going to continue to see these supply chain attacks. And it's just interesting in the last couple of weeks, we basically saw two back to back. And I think that's not going to be rare moving forward.
Oh yeah. Look at the SolarWinds hack that happened, I guess, a couple years ago. Again, time's going so fast now, I lose track of it. But same type of thing, right? It wasn't done through an NPM package, but ultimately they targeted SolarWinds because they knew that it was used in so many different environments in so many different ways, and it has elevated access as well. So it's absolutely, it's the same thing, but a new day, and we continue to see the attackers, and especially these coordinated, very motivated attackers, we continue to see them target the people, target the, try to reuse credentials. It's all the same things that we've, been talking about for decades now. It just manifests in a different way.
Absolutely.
So another big piece of news that also hit was Claude source code leaks. Now, that's very interesting code for people who want to build their own AI systems or their own AI companies. Do you guys see this? What do you think about what do you think the impact is going to be on the company and on general security, for exploit development, for vulnerability research, things like that?
I think that from what I've heard, they're talking about an IPO. I think this is going to have a big impact on that. Yeah, I mean, it's, especially getting to look at the code was very interesting to me. I read through some of it. Obviously, I forget how it's like 500,000 lines or something. Maybe I'm inflating that a little bit.
It was quite large.
Yeah. And it's
all vibe coded.
Well, that's the thing, right? They're saying that they kind of have Claude go through and identify certain things working itself. I saw a lot of tech debt, in there as well that I thought was interesting because, I'm also seeing that with a lot of different clients and people that are using stuff, stuff to build it. So, yeah, I mean, it's going to have.
I think we should pause and just say it's very interesting that Anthropic's Claude has tech debt when they're the ones writing the agent that's doing the coding, but their code has tech debt, which is likely being created, I'm just hypothesizing here, but created by their code agent, right? I just think that's an interesting thing to think about.
I made a joke, I think, a couple of weeks ago, one of the podcasts about this kind of happening where people were basically paying for code so that they can hack stuff, and then they're also paying so they can secure it as well. And it's like, do they actually have an incentive for it to write secure code to begin with?
Yeah. So you're using Anthropic's technology to write code insecurely, and then they're selling you the next tool to go through and pay them again to fix the code that they wrote to begin with. That is genius. I wish I would have thought of that.
It's all what do you call it? An Ouroboros just eating its own tail, right? Is a lot of what this feels like. But yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about people. Obviously, I'm big in the bug bounty space, and especially after one of the most recent episodes of the Critical Thinking podcast. I mean, I don't know anybody that's trying not getting up their own, Claude code set up. And mine, I built one out just to kind of learn from it. And I got 22 different MCP servers going. I built a couple MCP servers myself. They're free on my GitHub there.
Hold on. I just want to pause and say, how about this, Harrison? Since you're big into the bug bounty and using Claude, I got a suggestion. How about next episode you come on into our war room and you tell our viewers a little bit about bug bounty? How's that sound?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, no, that'd be great.
I need some of that info as well.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'd love to. Thank you. That'd be fantastic. But yeah, I mean, so you've got this interesting situation where the AI systems are getting really good at. I mean, they are getting good at hacking, right? Like, obviously, you need somebody experienced to guide it, but it's also getting good at writing code. So it's like there's this parallel race that's happening between these technologies, and everybody's got their own opinion about what they think is going to happen in the next 5 years. I don't think anybody ever really knows, but it's an interesting dichotomy, seeing it kind of play. The cat and mouse game has been put on hyperdrive. I
say that all the time. I love that. The cat and mouse game. I say that all the time.
Actually, I saw a write-up recently or an article, and it's kind of talking about this cat and mouse thing. And, up until now, you have a lot of... you being in the kind of bug bounty space will have seen this as well. There's a lot of particularly open source products which are saying, we're closing down our bug bounty programs because we're getting too much slop through. We're getting all these reports. None of them are valid. It's taken us a long time to validate them because they're just AI written. It looks legit, but it's not. But I saw an article basically saying that's actually all these people complaining about this. They're going to wish that was the state of affairs soon because they're going to keep getting the same frequency of reports, but they're going to be valid and they're going to be high severity. And you'd much rather have a lot of reports that aren't valid that you've just got to sift through the spam than actually just constantly have this fire hose of security vulnerabilities that you've got to be putting out.
Oh, that's exactly what happened to curl. So curl, one of the maintainers of curl that was originally talking about that they were getting so many AI slop reports, it just came out and put a message on LinkedIn, I think yesterday or if not the day before, said, hey, we're not seeing those slop reports anymore. The problem is we've got so many good reports. And by the way, this is happening much more often with companies that put their source code available, right? It's much more difficult from a black box perspective to do this. But if you have the code, these systems are very, very good at identifying real vulnerabilities. And so that's what and that happened in 2 months? They went from saying, this is slop, we can't use it. And part of that is the platforms are adjusting and they're being able to identify the slop and filter it out. But 100% to your point, it's getting good. And a lot of companies are about to start getting a lot of very valid reports that they're going to have to respond to, and they're going to need people to do it,
Well, I think to pivot this just a little bit, because I think it's relevant to our viewers, but talking about the Claude code leak incident, what I think is interesting from a security perspective is we saw, I think it was less than 40 hours after the leak, we saw attackers creating fake repos of the leaked code and using that as lures to get people to download it, right? To therefore then compromise their boxes. I'm trying to remember the exact details. I don't know if anyone's got it in front of them as far as, I think it was seven zip files and things like that they were using. But my point was that's a whole different attack surface, right? So now we're saying, everyone's talking about the intellectual property, ramifications of the source code being leaked, IPO, all that fun stuff. But like, hey, attackers use this to say, oh, here's a whole bunch of fake repos as far as the code to get you to download something, and then they're leveraging that for their advantage. I think we'll see more and more of things like that when we start talking about source code leaks in the future.
1,000%.
That's always been a problem as well with POCs, right? A new like 0-day drops, and most of the POCs that you find is like people on GitHub just hoping that people download and run it, when actually it's like some kind of malware.
Yeah, but I think it's worse with some. I mean, let's face it. In 2026, when everything's about AI and the big players in AI, you've got Anthropic, you've got OpenAI, you've got Google. If something like that hits, you've got more than just people that are normally looking at POCs. People that are looking at POCs are like me, you, and the industry that's dealing with that. But you've got a much wider base of individuals and developers that are going to download and take a look at this, and we start talking about trusted platforms, right? And, code run and things like that. It's just, that's a huge scenario.
No. With anything, I think, because now you've got so many people that are getting set up that don't really understand what the technology, what the AI is doing at a deep level. They're giving it all these additional permissions and allowing it to run commands and stuff for convenience. That's always been the problem, right? Yeah, exactly.
Go watch episode 1 if you haven't. We had Greg Richardson talk about OpenClaw. Go on.
Nice. I love it. But yeah, they've got these systems that have all these additional, and they're testing a bunch of stuff out. No, I want to get this to run and download this. It's so much easier for somebody to put something up that's malicious that appears to be legitimate and have people download it, and it goes and runs. And yeah, everything looks normal, but obviously it's establishing connections and doing things locally that you never know. And yeah, so it's, one of the things that hopefully we do as we continue as an industry moving forward is evangelize, like, hey, if you're going to be using this and giving it permissions, here's some educational resources where you can learn how to do it securely and things like that.
Well, even just talking about keeping it in Anthropic for a minute, they released, I think it was the last couple weeks, maybe last 3 weeks, they released that new feature. I think it's called, what's it called on Anthropic? I want to say like desktop
Co-work?
Or something, but co-work. Yeah, I think that's
Co-work,
what it is.
yeah.
Co-work, right? Yeah. And you're basically saying here, Anthropic, have permissions to make modifications, very similar to OpenClaw, by the way, to my desktop. Here's and it's just, yeah. And you've got, as you mentioned, you've got people that don't understand the technology saying, oh, this sounds useful, I'm just going to turn all the things on, right? And we're in a whole new world of attack surfaces when we start doing that.
Yep.
Speaking about attack surfaces, there was also the Chrome 0-day that was recently patched, I think with a wave of 20 other vulnerabilities that were patched at the exact same time. And I think that in the wild exploitation started shortly after the announcement as well. Did anybody see that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Chrome's been getting slammed lately, which is interesting to me, right? Because if we think about the history here, you go back to like 2011, 2012, 13, and then we got 14 when Microsoft released all their new protections when it came to browser security, and you had all these sandboxes and all that fun stuff, isolated heaps when it comes to browser. All of a sudden, browser exploitation kind of took a hard slowdown, right? It's not impossible, of course, and you see all kinds of browser exploitation, but in today's world, it's significantly more difficult. But we've seen a surge all of a sudden when it comes to compromising Chromium, which if I was a bad guy, that makes total sense to me, right? I mean, because you don't just have Google Chrome. Microsoft Edge runs on Chromium. You've got all these different browsers that base off of Chromium. We were talking about ROI when we were talking about supply chain attacks. Like that's a good platform to hit, but it's pretty difficult. Harrison, what are your thoughts about exploitation on browsers?
Yeah, well, I guess first of all, we're, going back to where we said bug bounty hunting, or I guess the AI is really good with when you have the code, right? People can take that code of Chromium, and they can also take these AI models and go through and bad people can go through and find things like that and go. So I think we're going to see that a lot more. From a practitioner standpoint, I know that over the past few years, I've seen a big increase in drive-by downloads, where you're, they're trying to just get you to automatically download. And a lot of those are going to take advantage of a browser exploitation. So I think security teams are going to have a lot more of that. I think that they're going to have to be, really cautious about, what they give access to and kind of lock that down as best they can. Because there's just going to, it's just going to keep happening. There's going to be more. They're going to take the source code off of things that they know are used widely. They're going to use the AI systems to find something that other people haven't found. And they're going to make a decision. Do I report this? And am I incentivized enough to report this to the company? Or am I motivation such that I'm going to take advantage of this in a malicious way? So, I think it's something that if security teams aren't already making adjustments and considering that, I think they should be. I think you're honestly a little bit, you want to catch up a little bit there and make sure you're cognizant of it.
And when we talk about browser security, not to spin this too far from the Chrome 0 day, but there's an interesting middle layer there that we're starting to see attackers take advantage of, and that's extensions. Right? Like, again, we talk about a trusted platform in a browser. We install these extensions in Chrome and other, Firefox and the rest of them. And we say, oh yeah, you can read any web page that I go on, right? You can, interject JavaScript code on the fly and make modifications and do things, right? And that's a trusted thing within the browser. And, that provides another attack surface that the challenge for defenders, maybe you've seen this too, Harrison, is now if you have a browser that's operating as a user and something malicious uses that, how do you differentiate that from normal user behavior? Because the browser extension looks like normal user behavior. And we've got AI systems now. By the way, Jonah, didn't we say we were going to stop talking about AI? What happened here?
One of these days.
I thought we were supposed to have an episode with no AI. It's just, when Anthropic stops leaking their source code, I guess we'll stop talking about AI. But what I was getting at there is, we have these extensions in the browser that we treat them like users and let them do behaviors. We trust them, right? And so now you get something like a Chrome exploit or some type of access. If a malicious, I don't even want to say person anymore, a malicious bot or malicious anything can take advantage of that trusted layer, they're going to be able to look like the normal thing happening in the browser.
All I wanted was dark mode, and I got system compromise instead.
Exactly. All I wanted was dark mode.
Wow. Yeah, and just kind of bring it full circle there when you look at the whole picture of everything that we've talked about, so they've got their agents that are running locally that they've already given excessive permissions to. They've got the browser that connects to that agents. You got your cowork going, right, where cowork can connect to the browser and browse for you and control. It's completely blurred the lines between the trusted and untrusted within this environment within their laptop. So, from an attacker perspective, things are popping off all different ideas that I can come up with. It's a question of, how do you lock it down and still empower your employees, your developers, everybody that's using this technology to get the value out of it? Because the reality is all of these people that are trying to use it in corporate environments, everybody right now is being they've got a lot of pressure coming down to get use of this, right? Companies are expecting more out of individuals when they're giving them these tools to empower them, and they're expected to move very fast. All this, I think, is going to come to a head. I think that it's kind of all converging into an interesting place for security.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Harrison, I want to say thank you so much for being a special guest on our Situation Room and looking at some of these stories with us. We really appreciate it. We're going to get back with you next episode and do a deep dive into some of the cool stuff that you've been working on. But I think that's a good wrap for what we've seen in the last couple of weeks as far as news stories here. And we'll go ahead and move on to the War Room for episode 3, where we will talk to one of the researchers here on some cool stuff they've been doing on their cellular technology. So thank you again so much, Harrison. And that's a wrap for the Situation Room.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, welcome to the War Room. This is our segment where we bring on guests from both inside and outside Rapid7 to talk about the latest and greatest research that's going on in the industry. And I am super excited to have with us today Deral Heiland. He is a principal security researcher focused on IoT here at Rapid7, and he's done some really awesome work lately around cellular technology. So welcome, Deral. You want to tell us a little bit about what you got going on?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. The research we've been focusing on probably over the last year or so has been targeting the concept of cellular embedded into embedded devices and how those devices have a trust relationship into a larger ecosystem.
And there's not a lot out there on cellular stuff when I'm looking around at Vuln Research. So I think this is pretty unique in that category. Did you find a lot of other research?
No. As we dug into other research, what we ended up seeing was there's research around SIM hijacking type attacks, or the concept of pulling the SIM module out of a device, putting in a development board, and using that to possibly pivot into an internal organization's network. Our approach was, hey, someone's already done that. What if added level of security has been put on there? Let's say it uses the IMEI number as some form of authentication, which is tied to the actual module itself versus the SIM. What if the CPU also does some level of authentication or validation into back-end services? Our goal was, hey, let's let the device set up all the trust connections, all of its authentication and everything, and then let's go ahead and use the cellular module as a side channel to gain access to those trusted resources.
Yeah, I think that's That's like an overarching theme across the entire threat landscape right now. I think we even talked about this in the threat landscape report that we put out several weeks ago. But this model of attackers are gravitating towards looking at what is a trusted layer and how can I get into that trusted layer? Because once you trust that layer, then you trust me as an attacker if I'm inside of it, like natively. And that's like a little bit of what you're talking about here but you're just focusing on the cellular part of that technology, right?
Yeah, the goal was to understand how those communication channels actually work in the world of cellular on devices, because we're all familiar with we've heard a lot of stories about attacking cellular comms and things like that. But typically, as that technology is advanced, to be able to cause the cellular device to step back to an older version that doesn't allow encryption, and then you have FCC rules regulations around capturing that kind of data or manipulating it. We found out that if we look between interchip comms between the CPU and the actual cellular device on the embedded technology, it's rarely encrypted. So we can literally at that point see all the comms that would go over the wireless network. And that is keys, certificates, passwords, authentication, the whole 9 yards. And then on top of that, we're able to leverage the fact that all cellular modules that we've looked at, basically the NB-IoT and LTE-M series devices, actually have 2 communication channels from the CPU. Only one of them is going to be used. It's either USB or it's UART. Both of them aren't used. So whatever one's not used, we can actually take over, and we have side channel access to an already authenticated into a larger ecosystem device.
You said a whole bunch of key words there that get me excited. So you're an actual hardware hacking expert. I like to pretend I am every now and then when I do a project here or there, and usually break something in the process. But what's really interesting when you start talking about hardware hacking, and I'd love to get your perspective on this in the context of this project, is where is the line from a practical attack perspective? Because a lot of times you're looking at physical access. Is that required? So kind of walk us through here, like what are some of the physical hardware things that you did during this research? And then how does this translate over to what a threat actor can do to make this a realistic attack in the real world?
Yeah. So on the hardware hacking, there was 2 areas we focused on. There is in the case of the test device that we use for our demos, it is a field camera. It's a camera device. So it's using an LTE-M device in it, which is a higher bandwidth, full duplex communications cellular type device. And it's typically going to be used in USB. So we have serial that's on the board not being used. And that's easy enough to trace it out, cut the runs, hook an FTDI device to it, and now you can talk to the cellular module while the device continues to run. You can send commands to it, AT commands. We've actually written code to do port scanning through the device, also scan cloud services to harvest data out of S3 buckets. We've actually written full functioning SOC 5 proxies that'll go through serial. So basically, you just plug into the serial on the board, and 9 out of 10 times it's easy to locate, and then from there you can route straight through it.
This is kind of like a Trojan horse opportunity then, right? With this USB
yeah,
camera.
I think so. I think so. The focus, like I said, the focus of the attack method isn't against the device itself. It's against who trusts the device. So as you get into more and more advanced devices, an example, automobile telemetry unit. So if you take a telemetry unit, which we know based on... I just want to
note really quick that Deral out of nowhere just pulled up an automobile circuit board, just like sitting randomly on his desk. I don't know that for those that are listening to this audio only probably can't see that, but not everybody that I talk to on a regular basis goes, what whips out, here's an auto component. So that's pretty awesome, Deral.
Yeah. I haven't done anything with this. I just haven't had time to do it yet with all the other research stuff we've been doing. But historically, we know a lot of the telemetry type communications will connect into back-end networks. So if we could tap into this on the serial, instantly we're into potentially a back-end network. Now, when you get into the USB stuff, there's an added level of complexity. To start with, most of the cellular modules, LTE-M, if they're actually using the USB, what we decided to do was to go ahead and splice a USB multiplexer into the actual circuit. So
what does that give us?
The cellular modules using LTE-M, with removing a lot of data, they'll actually use what's known as Ethernet control mode. Ethernet control mode is basically Ethernet over USB. So the CPU connecting to the cellular model over USB is actually getting an IP address right to the CPU. The cellular module's giving that to them. So what we do is we hook up a USB multiplexer and circuit as a 2-to-1. So we're going to have 2 hosts, 1 device. The device is going to be a cellular module. We let the device go through all of its authentication functionality, connects out to the cloud, connects out to the internal networks, and then we have our laptop connected to the multiplexer. We throw a switch, it switches the channel over to us. It gives us an IP address to our Mac. Now we have basically an Ethernet port through the cellular module out to whatever this device is authenticated to. And that works really well. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of shocking when we first did it. I'm like, I have this theory. Is this going to work? Is this going to blow up in my face? And my first attempt failed because I wired it backwards. But then I solved that problem, plugged into it, fired it up, and unexpected to me, I get a pop-up screen on my Mac saying, what virtual device do you want to connect this Ethernet to, basically? I'm like, well, let's connect it to the Mac. Gives me an IP address. In our demo videos, we actually fire up Metasploit on the laptop and actually right through the device because it's Ethernet for the most part. If ECM mode is not available, you're going to have what's known as ACM, which is asynchronous communication mode, and that's 0 over USB. Very similar, so it would actually show up on your device as a TTY for the most part if you were connecting over USB and ACM was enabled on the device.
Deral, I'm not a hardware guy. You talked about splicing cables there. Is there a risk that you damage the hardware here? Did you go through multiple devices during this research? Or?
So me and a good friend of mine, Carlotta Bidner, started this research like 2.5 years ago. The goal was let's learn everything we can all the way up to turn it into an attack vector. So yeah, I probably destroyed $1,000 worth of gear early on just trying to splice into. We kind of focused on NB-IoT early on because they were cheap devices, typically GPS trackers and things like that. And we ran into a lot of devices that were very finicky, to say the least. And you cut a wire and hook something up to it, and out comes the smoke, and nothing works anymore. And throw that in the trash and pull another one off the shelf.
Keep the magic smoke in the box. Rule number 1 of hardware hacking.
Yeah, so we went through a lot of devices. I still probably have half dozen GPS trackers laying around here. They're still brand new in the box that we never got around to. It was like, hey, I'm tired of burning up these devices. Let's look for something cooler. So then we started looking at higher end devices that were using LTE-M type communication devices for bigger bandwidth and started playing with those. Yeah, because there's always a chance you're going to smoke something. But we've got to the point of understanding how most of these devices work that generally I can usually tear a device down, gain access, and it's pretty rare for me to destroy a device. Usually I destroy a device very early and experimental when I'm just trying to do freaking crazy stuff to it.
You mentioned the UART. This is the port, right? This is like how you get data off these. So I'm just wondering, what kind of data are you looking to get off of it? And if you can't access like a UART port, what would be the process for trying to reverse it?
When we're looking at cellular modules, there's actually 3 different ports connected to a cellular module. There's going to be a USB, there's going to be what's known as a main UART. Those 2 components are used to send commands and data through the cellular module and typically connect to a CPU on the device to be able to do that. There is a 3rd port that exists on most of the devices we looked at. It's called basically a debug UART. So if you hook to a debug on the UART, you'll actually see the device boot up. You'll see the cellular module boot up. Some of the LTMs will actually give you a logon prompt so you can log on to them if you actually know what the password is on these devices there. So that's the interaction. So if we're looking at what kind of data we can get off these things, we published a paper earlier that we had talked about when we were just trying to learn how to communicate with cellular modules and how to gather data off these things. So you can sniff interchip communications between the CPU and the cellular module, either over USB if you have USB sniffers, or over serial if you use like an FTDI to hook to that. And what you're going to see is you're going to see various things. You're going to see everything from commands, setups, configuration data coming from the CPU to the cellular module that says, hey, we want you to connect to this APN. You're going to use this type of communications, or it may actually send various AT commands to set up HTTP, MQTT, raw sockets, things things like that. Or if it's going over ECM and you are sniffing USB traffic, you'll see everything. I can show you screen dumps of us sniffing traffic where we're catching the encryption keys, the passcodes, S3 buckets, everything that would show authentication, connectivity, and all the certificates and keys to connect into various cloud and cloud services, for example. So you can see a lot of data. Like I said, it's rarely encrypted coming from the CPU to the cellular module. Everything going out over cellular is perceived to be encrypted. So a lot of organizations don't, especially on a lot of IoT devices, don't really put the effort into actually encrypting it coming out of the CPU, which is bad, but it is what it is.
I think you just hit on a huge point, right? And that's that assumption component, right? A lot of times we assume encryption's being used, or we assume that an attacker can't look at it, so therefore we don't worry about encryption, or we assume it's strong encryption when it's actually really weak encryption and things like that. So when I teach about product security testing, I'm always harping on you got to verify these things. And the other thing I always harp on too is the magic smoke in the box. You got to have multiple test devices, because as you enumerated, you went through and used a whole bunch of them. But kind of bring this a little bit back to the research that you're publishing or have published. I'm curious. You mentioned something about SOC 5 proxies and as part of the research, and I know that you were working on a Metasploit module with that. So I'm just curious, how exactly does that Metasploit module allow an attacker to use a compromised device in the way that you did your research? Walk us through how that would work with the Metasploit module.
So the typical attack path I would think about would be a more advanced embedded device. Let's say some kind of autonomous robotic device. You buy a lawnmower that mows the lawn for you. It uses cellular connect into the back.
I can't bring myself to do that yet. Those things freak me out. I don't want a large blade on something that's autonomous.
Well, how autonomous are they? But okay, so you go out and you spend the several grand on one of these devices, and you want to carry out an attack on whoever it is. We know these devices connect out into a larger ecosystem that is actually AI driven in a large scale. So the attack vector would be, you're going to modify the device.
Deral, we promised our viewers that we were going to stop talking about AI. You can't do this to me, right? We're supposed to be talking about cellular stuff today. Come on now.
Just bleep it all out. Bleep out any mentions of AI.
Yeah, we'll have to bleep out AI for this segment.
There you go. So yeah, go ahead and bleep that out. So the smart stuff on the other side of the fence.
There we go.
We're connecting to get smart stuff to do. The goal is we can take this device. We know this device connects into a larger ecosystem, whatever that ecosystem is. It could actually go out through a private APN. It can connect into an internal network somewhere. So the attack vector would be, we would connect up to the serial on this device, because like I said, if it's moving a lot of data, we know it's going to be USB, or if it needs low latency, we know it's going to be going over USB and using an LTM or a more advanced module. So it's going to have a serial connection. That serial connection is going to be open. No one's going to be using it. We just need to find it. We connect into that. We hook up our FTDI or UART reader to our USB to our laptop. We fire up Metasploit. Now, we've been working on this module. It hasn't been published yet. Hopefully, we'll get this published out soon. So at this point, we bring the device up and we can go ahead and fire up this SOC 5 proxy. The way this SOC 5 proxy works is it takes all network communications, it interprets them into AT commands. ACT commands, old Hayes compatible concept commands that most communication devices have. Well, there's more advanced commands that are available from the various vendors. In this case, we use what's known as raw socket commands on the device. And it'll use these open, send, close, read, like 4 different commands, and it'll convert all the network traffic into these AT commands that'll go out to the modem, communicate out over the network to do whatever you want to do, and then reinterpret it back through the device into the SOC 5 proxy. So once the SOC 5 proxy is up and running on the Metasploit, you can either run external tools and point to that SOC 5 proxy, or you'll be able to fire up a number of Metasploit modules that are defined to allow a global SOC 5 5 proxy setting on the device. If they don't, because there is a lot of modules that don't support the global SOC 5 proxy, you can easily run an external SOC proxy tool with Metasploit. I've done that many times, and that'll give you access to the SOC 5 for the most part in that particular case. But it'll give you the ability to route all of your tools through. So you can route scanners through, you can route brute force tools, you can route exploits through once you identify targets. So generally, you basically have a device, it has trust, it connects out to whatever on the back end, and now we can use Metasploit or a number of other tools through this SOC 5 proxy and use that device, that embedded device ability to communicate as a pivot point into ever who you want to attack or exploit. And we develop these tools mainly for testing. There's going to be organizations out there that need to test products. Rapid7 has its own IoT pen testing team. These are tools they'll be able to use when they're testing products for a customer that have cellular capability. It gives them the ability to expand out and get a broader input or attack vector into the entire ecosystem and not be totally stuck down to the hardware. We have a pivot point to test all of the pieces of the IoT ecosystem.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing, right? And I love the fact that we integrate that stuff into these Metasploit modules. It actually reminds me, Deral, you and I have been long enough that you probably remember this too, but do you remember, I think it was the 2012 timeframe. You can tell me, someone can easily tell me if I'm wrong in the comments, that's fine. The old pwn plug that used to be able to bypass 802.11x on switches, doing something very similar that you're talking about, right? Where it would pass through traffic, make it look like it's normal, and then have a reverse SOC proxy back to the attacker, and you could send commands and inject them on the network as if you were authenticated. It sounds like a similar concept here that we've been able to build with the cellular network. That is, it's almost modernized. It's pretty interesting to see how that comes together.
The ability to make all of your tools for testing, evaluation, and attacks part of the ecosystem of that product. And that's the goal.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Joe, this sounds like some pretty awesome research that we don't see a lot of different content coming out on a regular basis. So I'm super happy that we got a chance to talk to you today on the podcast. So thank you for joining us. We will make sure the show notes has a link to Deral's research and any recent presentations he has on that. So go ahead and check that out. But we'll go ahead and sign off here for today. Thanks, Deral, one more time. Any last comments for our viewers?
Hack the world.
Let's go hack the planet. All right.
Thanks for joining us, Deral.
Thank you.
Welcome to the last and final segment for episode 3. We call this the Mitigation Minute. So we talked a lot today about different problems that we're seeing within the industry over the last couple of weeks. And so we're going to take a few seconds here to talk about potentially some solutions to that. One of the first things, Jonah, that we talked about that you brought up in the Situation Room was the supply chain attacks, right? And we saw, 2 different potential supply chain attacks that we briefly mentioned in the episode. So what are some things that organizations can do for supply chain attacks? One of those is when we were talking with Harrison there, we mentioned that part of the foundation of being able to defend against supply chain attacks is understanding what you even have, right? We can't defend against things that we don't know. And so this is where exercises like product security testing come really into play. This is taking a deep dive into the software that you're going to use or are using on your network and just understanding what those packages are. There are so many different packages that if you hear in the news that there's a problem with, you don't even know to go look at your solutions because you didn't know you were using those packages, right? So one of the big things I suggest is product security testing. It will help your organization be more informed to know what you're even having to defend against. Outside of that, if we talk a little bit specifically about the events that we saw with the supply chain attacks over the last couple of weeks, doing things like when you're installing a package from a defensive perspective, you should be flagging outbound network connections that are happening during those installations. Those, especially to anything that would be like an unexpected egress point, should produce a high alert in your environment. Also, isolating build environments so that they can't either reach external infrastructure during the install phase, if that's possible. Obviously, that's not going to work for all packages, but if that's a possibility, making sure that those are isolated off. Now, we also talked about the Claude code leak, and there are lots of different consequences that happen as a result of the leak with Anthropic's code. Jonah, what are you thinking is from a defensive perspective here?
Yeah, I mean, we're more looking at that from the position of they've leaked their code. It's a big thing for them, but it can also be a big thing for organizations because in this case, there was a rush for this code is leaked. All these repos suddenly get set up of like, we have the new Claude code. You can do this cheaper. This is more efficient. And people who are just in a rush to try and get the next best thing might download and install that and not realize that in itself is malware. So some things that can be done there. I mean, you could have some endpoint detection rules, which will basically flag if a repo is like a known Trojanized repo source. You could also have it so that it's detecting execution of unsigned binaries that have been downloaded from GitHub. And maybe you should just have like organizational like best practices going around of like, okay, this has happened over the past 48 hours. Nobody go and download and run anything that's related to this leak.
Yeah, kind of have like a time period, right? Where you're like, hey, we're gonna wait because it's related to a leak, and we don't want those, people downloading things that potentially could be malicious. Really, and we're especially like what we saw with the basically Trojanization of the leaked code, is we saw that developer machines were the ones that are getting compromised, which are a high value target for attackers because they have a whole bunch of, whether it's SSH keys, cloud credentials, they got access to a whole bunch of things attackers want access to. And we kind of need to put them in their own special risk class when we're talking about defending those machines. So I think that's some great points, Jonah, on things that we can do to make sure that we're just thinking about that it's a possibility. I think that's half the battle. Half the time we just need to realize that like, oh, we don't think Anthropic's code got leaked. That could be used as an attack. We have to think like the attackers. They are going to leverage these events because it creates things like this download frenzies where everyone's just clicking on stuff. They're not really thinking about the consequences, and we got to be prepared for those situations. Lastly, definitely don't want to skip over the really cool research that Deral presented in his in the war room there on his Cellular technology. Now, that's a really interesting situation when we talk about protection. I think that really we split that into kind of two different classes when we're talking about protection. So one of the things that he highlighted was the lack of encryption used between the different modules on the boards. And like, that's not something that you as an end user is going to have a lot of control over. So I think really one of the mitigations or thoughts that when you think about from security perspective is trying to make sure we educate product companies, the hardware companies that are developing these, that this is a real threat. And we want to leverage encryption as much as we can between the CPU and the cellular module, right? Can we use encryption to make those type of attacks less likely in that hardware-based class? And then lastly, when you're thinking about this from a consumer perspective, so you are using this technology, the things you do have control over, if you've got a cellular communication unit in a product, right, let's make sure that we segment that off, right? Segmentation is not necessarily a silver bullet, but it definitely helps reduce the blast radius if something like this gets compromised, like Deral was explaining in the segment there. So any other last thoughts on that, Jonah, before we wrap up episode 3?
No, just like, subscribe, and send us a message if you've got something cool you want to present on the podcast.
Man, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks, everybody, for listening to episode 3 of Hacktics and Telemetry, a Rapid7 produced podcast. Until next time, have a wonderful time and hack the planet.